Well, my special guest today is Tony Toppin. Tony's works covers UFOs, mind control, conspiracy, espionage, and psychic spy operations of the US and Russian during the Cold War. So he's been on ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, BBC local and national news channels. He used to be a regular on TalkSport before it became a sports format. So we'll be talking about espionage tonight and psychic spy operations. Well, I'm sure Tony will tell us all about his experiences and what's happened in his life. Can we please welcome Tony to the show? Hello, Tony.
Oh, hello, matey. Yes, I find the theme tune to your show darkly hilarious as to what we're going to go into, because it's a brutal and very unethical little nasty business, but it's also got a spiritual component to it, and these things can't be dressed up. There's a lot of people in the New Age movement today, we can't discuss it, it's too negative, but that's the problem. It's not transmuted into light, if you get my drift.
Yes.
And so I noticed you said alien technologies at the beginning, but what we're wanting to cover tonight is really the world of psychic espionage and psychic spying, yes. With a slant into UFOs and a slant into the work of a US government agency that not a lot of people know about, that have been looking at the UFO come spiritual kind of situation. And remote viewing and the psychic spying programs and all that kind of thing we can certainly have a look at. And the fact that Russia has some top psychic spy units, or did have in their time, and probably still ongoing, is also correct as well. And it's the world situation at the moment, the world affairs situation at the moment is very, very concerning. If I had my kind of psychic espionage unit general head on, if I was in my military uniform sat there leading a psychic spy unit, I'd be very disturbed by what I was seeing, and that's really the theme of it. And I think we got, at the end of the day, as my psychic friend Sue said, it's all spiritual, which it is, and it's all contaminated as well and corrupted all at the same time. Is all this? So it's an unethical, filthy little business. Is the world of psychic spying? There's no way of dressing it up otherwise.
No doubt about it.
No
it's
doubt,
proved
mate.
over the years, Tony, where things have gone wrong, people have been shot. People disappeared around the world.
Yes.
It is brutal, like you say.
It is, mate. And if you kind of like look at the Jason Bourne movies, I think that they just give a metaphoric example. A couple of films that maybe your listeners can have a look at as metaphoric examples of what goes on is probably the famous Bourne sequence on Jason Bourne trilogy on Waterloo Station, where he's being chased by the journalist who's trying to get to the bottom of the mind control program that had been running on Jason Bourne called Treadstone. And you see him on Waterloo, you see the journalist on Waterloo Station being stalked by people with a mindset that the journalist is not prepared for. And when it all happened with me, when I was getting the harassment and the unmarked helicopters, I was not prepared for any of that mindset. It's a certain mindset, and just recently I've been working on that mindset in order to handle certain situations that go on in terms of, it's complex, Bob, and I'll keep it very simple. In terms of corrupting, you can be corrupted by this business. It's a very nasty little business, and I'm kind of like professional at it. Not that I'm involved in any agency or anything like that, but there again, they have the technology to remotely recruit an asset, so they could do that. So I'm giving you some insights really into the world of psychic espionage, but I think we need to maybe begin at the beginning, Bob, and start at the very beginning, and then work our way through it.
A lot of the listeners out there won't know anything about this, only what they've seen on TV.
Correct.
So it'd be quite nice for you to start from the beginning and talk us through it.
Yeah, that's right. I think if you can explain it simplistically, Bob, you know your subject. I think if you go off on a tangent and the listeners start scratching their heads, that's just a disservice to them, isn't it? Basically in the beginning, we could say the earliest psychic spies in the UK was under Sir Francis Walsingham, believe it or not, where he used psychics for spying. He was the creator of what is now known as MI6, or the Secret Intelligence Service. But back in the day, Walsingham was spying on the Catholic Church. He recruited witches and psychics to have a look at what they were doing, in conjunction with John Dee. In conjunction with John Dee, who's another one we could look at on the list, if we were to build up a history of where we're going with it in terms of psychic spying, you could have a look at John Dee as well. John Dee was an excellent psychic 007. He used a crystal. Now then, is it a scrying crystal? I think they pronounced it.
Yes.
And he'd look into that crystal ball, and he would be able to see what was going on. He could predict what was happening. One of his most famous things was he could see quite clearly that Spanish spies had infiltrated Epping Forest, a big Navy shipyard in Epping Forest at the time, and they'd infiltrated it dressed as Frenchmen. But he saw that in a dream, and it was correct that had happened. And there was various other issues going on, including Sir Walter Raleigh, who saw it as well, who had dreams about the Spanish Armada invading England and how to obviously try and stop them. But it was interesting, I think it was Queen Elizabeth that signed John Dee with the code name 007. So you could technically say that John Dee was the first James Bond, the first psychic James Bond. He was the first 007, psychically speaking. The oracles at Delphi, for example, who had the ability to see, they could actually see. And really, throughout history, we have this kind of the use of psychics by the use of the military in terms of psychic spying on what the enemy was up to. And it developed, Bob, come the Cold War. Oh, my, it developed. It really, really developed. But the Japanese were using it in World War II. The Japanese, that you wouldn't hear of this on the internet, you probably wouldn't hear it written down, but it is out there if you look. The Japanese were using psychic spies during World War II. In one such incident, they used a female to try and locate a regiment. Whole regiment had gone missing, Bob. And so she used her psychic ability to locate where they were, and it turned out that they were in a village somewhere billeted and they were all safe, and that information proved to be correct. So you can see that there is this continual theme of kind of psychic espionage and psychic spying that the public don't see. Another fine example would be the famous psychic Dion Fortune. Don't know if you've heard of her, have you, Bob?
Oh, yes, I have, yeah.
Dion Fortune was one of the top psychics in the United Kingdom, and what she was very interesting, and has a present-day bearing on even today's goings-on, but basically she knew that Hitler was going to attempt to invade Britain, but as you will note, Britain was never invaded by Nazi Germany, because there was massive occult battles going on. I've forgotten the name of the forest. I think it may have been Ashdown Forest, where there was kind of like people who were doing magical rituals. Somebody came up to me at a conference, indicated that her cousin or sister back in the day attended these rituals at Ashdown to prevent Hitler from invading the UK. And what Dion Fortune did is she wrote this kind of operational manual, Bob, to project massive thought forms into the ether that would, and of course, in terms of quantum reality and all that kind of thing, they take on their own shape. And so you had this situation where there was angelic thought forms patrolling the coast of England, keeping the enemy back, etc., etc. So really, during World War II, there was a massive battle going on, an occult battle between these forces, including and Aleister Crowley and I think Ian Fleming was involved in all this kind of, in these occult goings on to prevent Hitler from invading Britain. There's an even more complexity. There's a staggering complexity to it, Bob, because you have to ask, and I won't go down there at the moment because it's a little complex, but you have to ask what motivated Hitler, what motivated Mussolini, what drove these people to this unwarranted destruction upon our planet. And that's a very interesting. That's where we really do get into an unorthodox, dark area of psychic espionage, looking at all that. But I'll just leave that where it is. I hope I'm not waffling, Bob. I'm just talking away.
No, you're all right.
No, okay. So what happened?
There want to know.
They want to know, don't they? Yes, they do, mate. They do. But feel free, listeners, feel free to chirp in. Bob, feel free to just chirp in. I
will do. Yes.
But what happened was, from that point onwards, I think during World War II, as I say, there was this massive occult battle going on, and it is said that what happened, and it developed into the Cold War, as we well know, where Russia, America, Czechoslovakia, Bob, currently are very interested in UFOs and the paranormal, and still are. And it was Czechoslovakia that started their psychotronic warfare programs during the Cold War. They started what's known as psychic spying or psychotronic operations. And what they started to do was develop a whole system of psychic warfare and leveled it against the Americans. And also the Russians did the same. And this started a whole kind of bonanza of psychic warfare and kind of darkly comical goings-on. And the Americans didn't have anything to counter this. And this all came about because, well, the American psychic warfare program, so it is said on the Internet, but it's a very different story. But for public consumption, you will look on the Internet and you will see that they developed Project Scan8, and they developed other projects as well, the Americans, in response to Russia and Czechoslovakia using psychics to blow up their missile boards. The Americans had nuclear missiles. They discovered that some of the boards were being blown, and they concluded, I think via their vast network of secret agents, that the Russians and Czechoslovakians were developing psychic warfare programs in terms of telekinesis and other things. And so the Americans developed what was known as remote viewing or psychic spying, and that has a fascinating history because it works. It's very effective, but it's been discredited, really, as to it not working. But they didn't invest all those millions of dollars for nothing. What I'll bring the listeners to is the Russian side of the story, which is even more fascinating than the American one. And then we'll probably explore the work of a secretive agency called the Collins Elite, which is the MJ-12 nobody's ever heard of. So we'll have a look at that as well.
Right.
And that's where we're really leading to, Bob. So what the Americans did is they wanted to understand how they could psychically spy at a distance, really. What mechanisms could they use? What systems could they develop to gather intelligence upon the enemy? And there's real kind of pressure involved in all that. Even today, I think when you see some of these people who work for MI5 and all that kind of thing, tailing suspects, they have the Watchers, they have this secretive kind of element.
That's right.
The Watchers. I forgot what it was, Section A or something, but it's a high pressure, high stakes game. And of course the Americans needed an edge. They needed an edge. The British indicated that they never used remote viewing, and the British indicated that it was not of use to them. They did use remote viewing. I think they were using it in about 1900s. The British would definitely use it. And we could see in terms of Dion Fortune that she was using it with her, occult adepts as well. And if you look probably at all the people who worked in MI5 or MI6, they would have been skilled in the esoteric. They would have kind of like been skilled in all that. So the occult was never far away from the world of espionage. Even if you look at Sir Francis Walsingham, he was using these techniques to counter intelligence operations by the Catholic Church in about the 1500s, I think, something like that. And my good friend Irene wrote a book, and I recommend it for your show, Bob, called The Psychic Spy. And that was her memoir.
That sounds
on Amazon. What is interesting about Irene's book is it's a work of fiction, or is it? But it's the autobiography of a psychic spy who worked for MI6. Now, what is interesting is MI6, Britain's foreign intelligence services, during the Falklands War used remote viewers. And what is so interesting about her book is the fact that it's all in there. And you won't see that on the Internet up in lights either. So what we're looking at is stuff your listeners will not even know of, that's kind of like a bit hidden from view, but needs to be looked at in order to build a picture. And that's what I was doing, Bob. I was building a picture of what was happening to me in terms of UFOs. I wanted to see these kind of psychic espionage programs had answers for me. I could understand. They unlocked certain things for me so that I could understand what was going on. And this lady who allegedly worked for MI6 wrote a book called The Psychic Spy, and she tells this fascinating incident of remote viewing the sinking of the Belgrano, and this incredible. But what in her writing, but what is interesting is the incredible pressure and stress she was under as a psychic spy, one incident where this poor guy is in the water, and she traumatized herself, I think, because the guy who was in the water was an Argentinian sailor, and she says in the book that he was looking up at her as if he could see her, because she was displaced in time, and she could actually see what was going on, and it looked as if this guy could see her like a ghost, and he was looking up at her, and 1,001 things that went on, where the pressure was very real. It's the hidden world of John le Carré, the world that people don't see. And so the pressure was on her to perform, and she wrote this excellent book called The Psychic Spy, and it details all the trials and tribulations of that, including assassinations and car chases, and it really is something else. And I think it takes tremendous courage to realise that. I mean, she even, as I understand it, during one remote viewing session, she even predicted the incident of Sir Galahad and the kind of, when they were in that cave area. We're in San Carlos Bay, were they? And I think the Argentinian jets went and bombed them, and she even saw that. A very gifted lady and a very cracking good book.
Marvelous.
That's called The Psychic Spy. That sheds light on the British operations with remote viewing. But I'll take your listener back now in the narrative to the Americans, back again to the Yanks, where they were developing these remote viewing programs in response to the Russians and the Czechoslovakians who were blowing up their missile silos. And they started to wonder, how could we get the ordinary soldier, or the ordinary guy, the ordinary military guy in the field of operation, in the battlefield, how could we get him to use his mind to gather reconnaissance on the enemy psychically? And they came up with this ingenious idea called scan by coordinates, SCAN-8, what's known as coordinate remote viewing, or CRV. There's some excellent stuff on the internet about it, Bob, and I do recommend Learn Remote Viewing. LearnRV, I think it's called .com. LearnRV.com, and there's some excellent articles there. Now, what happened is that they studied a guy called Ingo Swann and a few other people who had security clearance, decided to study this situation that was occurring, that the Russians and the Czechs and the Warsaw Pact were using psychic spies on them, and they needed to respond to that. And so what they did is they developed this remote viewing thing, and they developed it kind of roughly based on the Dolby sound system. They had a look at sound. They had a look at something, Bob, called signal from noise. They wanted to know what the human performance factors were.
Then? Signal from
I'm
noise.
coming to that. Yes, signal from noise. No, not at all. I'm just leading into it now. So what would happen, Bob, is that there would be a lot of pressure to understand. For example, there's a famous remote viewer called Joseph McMonigal, who's aware of my experiences and my work, and kind of like gave me an endorsement because of my kind of extreme paranormal experiences. He was remote viewer 01, and there was another top remote viewer called Pat Price, a retired police officer. And what this was all about was, Bob, if you were to, and even me as well, if somebody sat in front of me and said, or you, Bob, for example, and said, right, Bob, we want to know what that submarine is doing in that area at such and such a time, can you remote view it for us? You probably wouldn't have a clue, Bob, would you?
No,
where
probably
to begin
not.
with the procedure.
No.
Yeah, that's what. And basically, what I'm saying is not that you wouldn't have a clue, because you probably would, Bob. But once you knew how to do it, but what would happen is there'd be all sorts of noise factors coming to your head. A, I can't do it. B, oh my God, I'm going to get it wrong. C, D, E. The performance factors, the skill fade factor, would kick in, and it would affect the performance of the target data, or the product, as it's known. So what would happen is what they developed was a system. Now all that, Bob, all those thoughts and spurious thinking of you can't do it, or where's the submarine, oh my God, I can't do it, blah blah, was known as noise. But
pressure.
what they discovered, pressure. But what they discovered is in the first 2 seconds. So for example, Bob, if somebody walked up to you and you said, and you looked at them and thought, oh, I don't like you, mate, or I don't like you. There's just something about a situation that I don't like. That's signal. Yeah, so that would be signal. That's psychic signal. And then what would happen is that the conscious mind would be known as noise, and the conscious mind would kick in, and you completely probably dismiss the situation and carry on, and then bang, you'd suddenly realise that you wished you'd listened to your intuition in the first place, which probably lasted for about 3 seconds. Do you get me? So that's known as the intuition kicking in. So you're looking at that individual for the first 3 seconds, Bob. You don't like them, but then you dismiss it and carry on with what you're doing, and then a situation arises, and you think, God, I wish I could have obeyed my intuition. Do you follow me?
Oh, yeah, I do that.
Okay. So what
I'm
happened
a bit like that myself. If I see somebody and I come up close, I always know I won't get on with them.
That's right, mate.
I know for a fact I will not.
Signal. Yeah. The intuitive signal.
Straight away, it comes through me.
That's right.
Derek's just in the chat room at the moment. He just said, has Tony ever remote viewed anything that's frightened him?
Yes. Yes, I have. Yes, terrifying, frankly. It's a dirty little business, Bob, is all this when you get into it at a certain level. Yes. I won't lower the energy or anything like that with your listeners, but the answer to that, in short, is yes. And it was nuclear related, and we won't go any further into that. But
that's fine.
All right, mate. We're here to have I think we're here to have a chat. I don't want to kind of get into because it can get extremely, what's the word I'm looking for? Scary when you really get into it.
Yeah,
I'm just being responsible, you know.
Be careful what you you say.
Yeah, well, we don't want listeners going off there feeling worse than what they were when they were listening to it to start with. You know what I'm saying? So do we want them educated? Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We need them educated. So where was I, Bob? I was talking. Oh, intuition.
You were on about remote viewing.
Yeah, remote viewing we were on about, yeah. Okay, so what we were thinking of. So obviously, Bob, in some cases, you look at that person, the first 2 seconds don't like you, and then sure enough, about an hour later, something happens and you wish you'd obeyed your intuition. What happened that the Americans were interested in terms of their remote viewing research? That first 2 seconds they're very interested in. That first 3 seconds their scientists were very interested in because it's signal. Do you get me? But anything that happens after that first 3 seconds was noise. So what they developed was a system that would interrupt the noise and give a signal. Do you get me? So what they developed was a signal, that was a system that would keep your intuition open so that you would kind of like follow a flow of data that would lead to a conclusion. And a very fine example of that is Ed Dames when he gave a remote viewing course. And he did this technique, and they predicted the Madrid terror bombing. And they got the buildings, they got the train station, they got it all, because they knew how to interrupt the noise and get the signal with the mind. So they knew how to control intuition. And they came up with this ingenious system, and I do some remote viewing workshops, Bob. They always go down a storm. It's an evening crash course that I do, and everybody's thoroughly blown away by it because the system works. They developed this system called an ideogram. And you wouldn't believe it, Bob, but the ideogram system is a kind of like a language all in itself. And in the very basic Occam's razor principle to that is a squiggly line in a box. You're given this form in front of you that these American scientists developed and spent millions developing, and it's got a load of stuff on it. But one of these things that it's got on it is a box with the word ideogram on it. Little box with the word ideogram on it. Yeah. And then it's got this kind of these 2 little bars, which is like bingo numbers, the coordinates. So what would happen is if let's say, for example, the American intelligence people were remote viewing a submarine base in Russia, which they did to a high degree of accuracy, the Americans were suspicious that the Russians were building a big nuclear submarine base, and this guy, Pat Price, retired police officer, nailed it. In fact, he nailed it so well it was better than the satellite imagery that they'd got during this process. And what would happen is Pat would not know the coordinates. He would not know that he was looking at a submarine target. If they told him, Bob, what he was looking at in any way, shape or form, it would corrupt the signal and we'd start getting the noise. Do you get me? So what would you get me? So what would happen is it would be like calling the bingo numbers. This guy would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all of a sudden the remote viewer would draw this squiggly line in this box that just resembled a squiggly line, but it isn't. It's far more to it than that. What they discovered, these researchers, was that squiggly line opened the door to signal and not noise for the first 4 seconds. It was the first 4 seconds the subconscious mind travelled to the location and came back again and could decode the information from the squiggly line in the box. Do you think that's marvellous?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. It
was like retrieving a zip file on a computer, but the mind was doing it. So what they were doing, the subconscious mind via this little system was travelling to the location subconsciously and coming back with the information which could then be decoded, and it was known as an ideogram. And what's fascinating, Bob, is that I know during my workshops, because it works, the ideogram system, it works, you had symbols. It would appear there was a collective symbolism of squiggly lines. It appeared during research that they weren't just squiggly lines. If you had 5 remote viewers and they drew these squiggly lines, they began to mean something. A squiggly line, there was a squiggly line for energy, there was a squiggly line for life force, there was a squiggly line for water, there was a squiggly line for being up on a mountain. It's as if the subconscious knew where it was in this little squiggle called an ideogram, and it had its own language to it. So they developed it further and discovered that from that ideogram on this form they could decode various components of data and create an intelligence picture of the target that they required, which was incredible. And that's basically, in a very basic, simplistic way, how the system works. And it was known as Coordinate Remote Viewing, or CRV.
Yes.
And it worked with some... It is, mate, and it worked with some startling results. And what would happen is you would have this situation occur where you'd write down the smells, the textures of the place, what it was like if you were there in one word, any dimensions, steel. Steel, was the steel there? Was the smells there? What kind of dimensions were there? And in a lot of cases, during the workshops I'm blown away by, in a short space of time, how people can just suddenly get it working for them. And you had something, Bob, on the form called AOL, Analytical Overlay. And the thing with that was that was the noise. So let's go back to the intuition. The intuition sees the person, doesn't like them for the first 4 seconds, that's signal. All the blurb after that is called noise, but they actually term that noise as something termed analytical overlay, or AOL. And what would happen is, in order to filter that noise, or conscious, I can't do it, I don't know where the target is, they would declare junk thoughts in a little box. So they had a primitive filtering system, Bob, that could zone people's intuition onto something and filter out the conscious noise. And in terms of remote viewing, noise will be bright colours, yellow, orange, red, radiators, curtains, bright curtains in a remote viewing session, all cause noise, you see. They would all cause an imprint on the subconscious mind. And it worked. And I know that from, for example, targets we've done have been the Humber Bridge. We did Army Cadet Force, did a remote viewing session. This lad, 14 years of age, did the session, and it was a North Korean launch site, rocket launch site. He drew the whole lot, the rocket, the writing, the gantry, the whole lot, and he'd got how it worked. He'd got how to separate his signal from noise. Incredible, isn't it?
Oh, that's amazing.
It is, isn't it?
How somebody could pick up something like that in a very short time.
Oh, yeah, up in Wales, for example, Bob, when they did the little remote viewing evening that I do, every single one of them, well, not every single one of them, but about 7 people, when you put all their separate drawings together, it formed the target. It actually formed the target, which was a Tibetan temple. They'd drawn components of it. Somebody had drawn the bricks, somebody had drawn the roof, somebody had got what it smelt like. And then there's an unusual scenario where I had an individual drawn the whole target, actually she'd not drawn the whole target, she declared it as junk thinking. She'd written down every single component of the target, but thought it was junk, so declared it as junk. And that was quite amazing as well. And it's, so they developed this system, and the system was all about separating the signal from the noise, and it worked. I know Joseph McMonigal, Joe, he's done some superb remote viewing using this system, and he was awarded a Legion of Merit for gathering intelligence by unorthodox means. It's a dirty business, Bob, and I'm certainly not here to kind of like put them on a pedestal, you know, or anything like that. It is a dirty business. I'm not here to do that. But what it is interesting to know is how, you know, they develop the concept of signal from noise. And that probably leads us very interestingly into the Russian remote viewing programs as well, if you want me to discuss that with you, which was a different story altogether, mate.
Is that a bit different, Tony? Is that a bit different for what we do?
It's totally different. What we do. What would I do? I couldn't even describe what I do. I'd be under the banner of, if we were talking remote viewing, as Joe McMonigal would indicate, I would be under the banner of an exceptional human experiencer. During the remote viewing programs, a woman called Jessica Utz developed this concept called exceptional human experiencer. So I'm somebody who's the equivalent of a Fox Mulder who's having these extreme paranormal experiences, which could be termed an exceptional human experiencer. Of course, in the UK, there's a lot of debunking that goes on with it. And you know, Bob, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So we can prove that none of this works. We prove that spirituality doesn't exist. We prove that Tony's just a loon who doesn't actually know what he's talking about, when in fact knowing, there's a knowing out there that all this is going on among governments and the military and all this. Yeah. There is a knowing, and it's a dirty little business. You know, so but it has had its kind of benefits for remote viewing for missing people, and you know, some of these guys who were involved in the American remote viewing programs had some tremendous spiritual awakenings because of it all, and some of the guys involved in the Russian remote viewing programs had some tremendous spiritual awakenings from it all and designed a whole new knowledge of the cosmos from it. But you won't see their name in lights because obviously, Bob, somebody wants a war with Russia. So you won't see their name in lights anytime soon. And that's disturbing. That's really disturbing that climate is in existence at the moment, because from my viewpoint, you have to ask, what's it doing there? It's like looking at a game of football, Bob, and the football hits the net, but you can't see the football, but you see the net move, and you think, hey, what's all that about? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So the Russian story of remote viewing is... the Americans, of course, developed coordinate remote viewing and developed it into various operations called Project Scannet, Project Stargate, Project this, Project that. But what I think we'll do, after I've explained the Russian stuff, is maybe have a wander into what was happening even before the remote viewing started with the Americans. You know, according to the Internet, in the 1970s, they started exploring this. They were doing it before then in the 1950s as well. And not a lot of people know that either. And I think we'll have a delve in there also, if that's all right with you.
That's fine. That's wonderful. It's because, you know, people out there want to know a little bit of that and a little bit of this. And it's good, but we've got you on the show tonight to explain it all.
Yeah, mate. You've got to keep it simplistic. It develops.
Simple,
it all develops into something else, and it all develops into something quite. What's the word? I'm not saying quite insane. That would be the wrong word, although it is bonkers. But it all develops into an understanding of the cosmos, which indicates to us that time is not as we would know it. Time is not local. When dealing with UFOs, time is not local. Time can be happening all the time, and that's something that you come to learn to deal with as a UFO contact experiencer. But I think that's another story altogether for now. But yeah, so the Americans, they developed their system of remote viewing, and as you can see, it was all done. It was called coordinate remote viewing, and it was all about separating the signal from the noise. They got that, Bob, from the Dolby sound system. They thought they could apply hi-fi engineering to it. They understood what they wanted to know was how the guy in the field, in the military field, could separate his signal from noise and get the results that they wanted. And this guy, Pat Price, this retired police guy, he was that good. It is rumoured that the KGB nobbled him because he was so good. He drew this whole top-secret submarine base via this remote viewing technique, which the Americans couldn't see via satellite. And I think Ingo Swann remote viewed the rings of Saturn before the satellites had even got up there to see them, using this method. And as I say, Bob, during my workshops, I've seen this method work, and work fantastically well. One guy at Southport, he drew the whole target. He just went, my God, I know what it is, and drew the whole lot, which can happen,
Yes.
But the CRV technique is a cumbersome technique because you've got it down to you need 8 sheets. There's 8 sheets of drawing by the time you finish to form the main drawing, so it can be quite a cumbersome system. I think Ed Dames has managed to narrow it down so that you draw a single sheet with the full target data on it. And it's certainly very, very interesting. The results from the American side of things for remote viewing is certainly a very interesting story. But Joseph McMoneagle, I had a few emails with him chatting away, and he told me of a man who was his opposite number. Now remember, Joseph McMoneagle was America's remote viewer 01. He was America's #1 James Bond psychic spy.
Yes.
And he sent me an email chatting about my experiences, and then he directed me to a man called Alexei U. Savin. You wouldn't have heard of him, Bob, neither did I at the time. I don't think your listeners would have even heard of him. And he said, Joe said that this man was my equivalent in the KGB. And that's interesting because my father was very psychic, Bob. He wasn't a very nice man. He was very psychic, and he was approached in Vienna by the KGB, so he told me. And there's a possibility that even back then it was very X-Files. People were being tracked and monitored even in the 1950s for these abilities. I've no idea what my father was going to get himself into, but my father reported it to his superiors. My father would, Bob, if I was naughty, he wouldn't smack me, and my father would just give me a stinking migraine, and I'd be sparkle on the bed at age 10 years of age. People find that very cruel. Yeah, people do. People find that very cruel. When I say that, at first when I came out with that remark, I was a bit astounded when people went, "That's not on. He shouldn't be doing that to you." And I'm thinking, no, he bloody well shouldn't. But that's what he used to do, Bob. He'd sparkle me out on the bed with a thumping migraine if I was naughty. And yet I've seen him heal cats. I've seen him bring my Uncle Bill back. He was a tremendous hands-on healer, but for some reason he became corrupted. There is a school of thinking, because of what I've lived through and seen, that he may have been targeted by these unseen forces that work around us, and that's a tragedy in itself. So, that was my father, and he was very psychic indeed. But we're talking about Alexei Savin, aren't we? Alexei U. Savin, who had this special psychic spy unit.
Can I just ask you a question? Derek's just come in the chat room again, and he says, just find it in a minute. It's gone up a little bit. Right.
Oh, Derek, I know that.
Derek said, can 2 or 3 remote viewers working together get good results?
Yes, they can. As demonstrated even in the short evening, where we had a demonstration where they did this Tibetan temple, and somebody got the bricks, somebody got the roof, somebody got the smell of the place. And when you put all their pictures together, what they'd drawn, it formed the temple. It was incredible. There was one lady who was an engineer at one of these workshops. She did the whole target. But they say, Bob, that engineers, musicians, people who are very practical are very good at remote viewing. People who are psychic are lousy because there's too much noise going on in their head, they discovered, for them to do accurate remote viewing, accurate drawings. Just too much noise with the psychic. So psychics are not necessarily very good at remote viewing, they discovered. But a collective, yes, definitely so. And then the Americans had something called 8 ability. 8 ability is the ability to remotely influence, which is, at certain levels, very, very dangerous work. At certain levels, sometimes there's an old adage, Bob, of not all help leads to freedom. A very ancient proverb. Not all help leads to freedom. Sometimes it's best to leave things alone. But they developed not only remote viewing, they developed this thing called 8 ability, which was the ability to remotely influence. A guy called Lynn Buchanan tried to influence Saddam Hussein. He tried to, I think what he did is he tried to make him ill, but Lynn became unwell. So that's recoil, isn't it? Lynn actually became unwell trying to influence Saddam. And the ability, it was called 8 ability because they celebrated these kind of triumphs of remote influencing with 8 martinis, the Americans, so it was called 8 ability. The Russians call remote influencing walk-in mind operations. They call it walk-in mind operations of the Russians. So even now, in the public domain, the remote influencing of events is a very sought-after ability, Bob. Very sought-after ability. People who can influence things. Sought-after ability. More so probably than remote viewing, I would think. But it has that kind of karmic recoil because what is disturbing, Bob, and I'm sure your listeners will concur, is the fact that the spiritual realm is now corrupted. anything that is pure and spiritual is now tainted with this kind of nauseating military kind of exploration of death and destruction within it. Do you get me?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes tainted and corrupted, and it's a shame. It's a crying shame. It's a tragedy that they could militarize that zone. But that's what they were trying to do. That's what they did do. They militarized it. And it was fascinating to hear the dialogue of Alexei Savin and his special psychic spy unit in the KGB, what Joe put me onto. He ran a unit, Bob. Now, I've forgotten... Joe's unit had a name, but I've forgotten what it was called. But it was basically they were remote viewers. The Americans called them remote viewers. The Russians called them information channelers. So the Russians don't call them remote viewers. The Russians call them information channelers or information operatives. Yeah, information channelers is what the Russians called. Now, what is fascinating, the American technique was based on signal from noise. You were given coordinates and you separated the signal from the noise with a squiggle like an ideogram that directed the mind to the target. But with the Russians, they did brain tuning. They did a brain tuning technique. They discovered that the brain was like a tuning fork and it could be tuned to do things. And that's what their discovery was. And it's very hard, sought after information, to find out precisely what their technique was when remote viewing something, but it was very powerful and very different from the Americans. And so he had a unit called Troop 10,003, did Alexei Savin. This special unit was the Russian Psychic Spy Unit. And you will see on the internet that they have a website called newcosmology.com. NOOCOSMOLOGY of cosmology, so it's new NOO with the word cosmology on it .com, or you want to maybe look at the Russian website, which is .ru, and it has some fascinating information on it, absolutely incredible stuff on there, including an ancient Assyrian document called "Who Reigns the World," and it's a document about even back then how rulers controlled the population. It's up on their website. It's a fascinating piece of documentation. How ancient rulers, it was an Assyrian document, and very ancient, how rulers controlled their populations via spin and the media, even in those days, and it's up on their website. It's a fascinating website. But what I thought was interesting about this guy Savin, Bob, is he gave an interview to Pravda. Pravda. He gave this interview to Pravda, which I'm not
Pravda,
exactly...
Yes.
Pravda, the Russian press, the Russian newspaper, which has got excellent UFO stuff on it, but I'm not its number one fan. But he gave an interview to Pravda, and he was I don't know what his rank was, but he was in the military, and he gave this very relaxed interview to Pravda, saying that his psychic spying unit preferred to use women because they were better at it than men, and they had better intuitive signal handling. Basically, the gist of it was it was all about information quality. And so with me, Bob, with my UFO experiences, it's all about information quality now, not about kind of saying any old thing just because it fits. The information quality has got to be spot on. For example, I'm one of the few contactees in the UK who has his own image analysis of UFOs, of his UFOs filmed, and they're all analysed, and there's no doubt in my mind that they are UFOs. There's an interesting thing, what he said, though, in terms of UFOs. He gave this interview to Pravda, and he said that his unit had established contact with occupants of UFOs. They'd established contact with an alien civilization. And what was interesting, he said, was that during our remote viewing sessions with them, or conversations with them, only medical information was given. This civilization would not give them any military information at all. It was all medical related. Nothing was given to them that was military. There's a very, Bob, hidden race out there, a hidden espionage race to acquire information about UFOs and how they fly and how they work, and that's still going on to this day, I do believe, between the superpowers and the governments.
I can imagine so.
It is,
yes.
Mate. In fact, the other day, Bob, I was phoning my local council last week, or the week before, I can't remember when it was, and I picked up the phone. It was about 3 weeks ago. And as I pick up the phone, there's this American woman on the end of it, talking to somebody else, American she was, going, yeah, okay, thank you, as if she was in the middle of a conversation with somebody, American, yeah. And then I dials the number, of the council to end up speaking to a guy in Germany who just started speaking to me in fluent German. I've no idea why, but I think it was ulterior. I think there was something going on, and I think that there was something untoward about it all. And so I just I said, sorry, wrong number, and put the phone down. Interesting, isn't it?
It very is interesting.
It is, isn't
when
it?
you do that, you pick the phone up and somebody's there in American, and next minute it's German.
Yeah, somebody was there, American, and they were chatting to somebody else, and it was as if they were taken unawares on the phone line, and then suddenly I was speaking to somebody in German, in fluent German, and that has a bearing on my experiences, but I won't go into that because that's UFO related. We'll stick to the psychic espionage stuff, but this is the kind of thing that happens where people are monitored, and so Mr. Savin's team had detected these UFOs and had a conversation with them, but it was all medical related stuff. No military information was given, and they developed this system called New Cosmology, which was a new cosmology of the universe, an understanding of the universe and what went on. And there's some very good articles on there, including the kind of remote influencing operations that they did, which of all things, they did one on Madeleine Albright. They did this walk-in mind operation on Madeleine Albright. They remote viewed her. Don't know whether they influenced her, but they remote viewed what she was thinking, which raises some serious ethical questions, but there you go. But that's what they did. It's a grisly business. This is seemingly what they do. And they went and remote viewed her and discovered all kinds of things, all kinds of agendas that were going on with her, including this predilection to orientation towards kind of getting into Russia and getting its resources and so on and so forth. That's what they gleaned. I make no judgment on it, Bob. I hasten to add, I don't know. I don't know whether it was true. I don't know why they did it.
Well, that's
I make no judgment on it. But that's what they were doing from a military point of view. I'm just explaining the narrative, and so he became hugely successful. Did Alex's website and unit. Not a lot of people know it, but it's called New Cosmology, and they developed this system called New Cosmology, which understood from all the remote viewing and psychic spying an understanding of the cosmos, an understanding that UFOs existed. And what is even fascinating is if any general from the UK went on national TV and came out with all this, he'd be laughed off. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
and so it's
interesting.
Interesting, Bob. Very interesting that they came out with that so openly. And that was the Russian equivalent of it. So it was brain tuning, Bob. It was brain tuning, and they were called information channel operators, not remote viewers. And what they had is like a quality criteria, so that if the information channel operator was gathering information, it had to be of a certain quality and caliber that they could then translate it into intelligence products. And that's what they did, the Russians, and they were very, very good at it, as was the Czechoslovakians, which is a story in itself. If you'd like to hear the story about what's happening to a friend of mine in Czechoslovakia, Bob, it's still with UFOs. It's a very interesting one.
Yes. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. You can tell us a little bit about that till the end of the show.
Yeah, we'll do. Well, what we'll do, we'll just tell this story, and then I'll go into the Collins Elite and talk a bit about the Collins Elite as well, which is a favourite little subject of mine. But basically, this lady in Czechoslovakia is a UFO contactee, and she was telling me that she was approached by a minister in the Czechoslovakian cabinet who was keeping an eye on her, kind of was interested in her UFO contactee story, which seemingly is known by the Czech president. What is interesting about that is the country, Czechoslovakia, were world leaders in psychic warfare, in development of psychic kind of goings-on, in terms of applying electronics to it as well. And it's just interesting how that is still ongoing at the moment. It's as if, Bob, despite what you read on the internet, despite all the poo-pooing that it's not working, we don't use it, it's going on. I think they definitely still use it. They do. And so if you look on the internet in the 1970s, sorry, not in the 1970s, if you look on the internet, you'll see data from the American internet regarding remote viewing projects, Scan 8 projects, Stargate, and so on and so forth. You'll see all that information there to do with remote viewing, coordinate remote viewing. You'll see very little to do with the Russians other than a little website, but that website is quite a good one. But what a lot of people don't know is during the 1950s, the Americans, even before they developed these projects in remote viewing, the Americans were looking at psychic spying in terms of something called MK Often. You may not have heard of MK Often, Bob, but it was the earliest psychic spy experimentations, and it was called MK Often. Often we achieve our goals, often we do not. And they were using fortune tellers, and they were using all kinds of psychics to see if they could use them for intelligence gathering purposes. And it was at that time in 1947 that you had the incident at Roswell, and you had the agency, I think under Truman form, which was called Majestic 12.
That's right, yeah.
What a lot of people don't know is, and I think even Majestic 12 didn't even know, was that according to the excellent work of researcher Nick Redfern, there was another agency that sprung up in America called the Collins Elite. It consisted of the American Air Force, the FBI, and elements of the military. They were very smart, and they wanted to know why UFOs were coming into their airspace. What was triggering a UFO presence in the skies over America? They wanted to know what was going on, why this was happening, and they very cleverly traced it back to a guy, now then, what was his name? Hughes Corporation. He worked for the Hughes Air Corporation. I've forgotten his name. Yeah, Hughes Aircraft Corporation he worked for. And I've forgotten his name. I'll have to look it up later. But basically,
that's okay. Yeah,
they traced it back, which is very clever, to a guy who was working for the Hughes Aircraft Company, who was a friend of L. Ron Hubbard's. This is the story. And they traced it back. These UFOs were coming in due to occult ritual. They traced back the presence of these UFOs were coming in due to occult ritual, and they wondered why that was happening. They discovered that these UFOs were coming in due to tears in space-time, and that was due to these great big occult rituals that was going on. And so the Collins Elite, named after the cheese-making district of New York, developed their own kind of analysis and intelligence-gathering operation to wonder if UFOs were demonic. And it's interesting that there is an interview with Paola Harris. I'll have to get the interview up there. He's a Monsignor in the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church has their own department dedicated to UFOs, aliens, angels, the demonic. And the research was quite evident, according to the Collins Elite, that there was something going on that was quite amiss. And this formed the basis of a concept called non-human entities, or NHEs, which the Department of Defense were already researching. And so, in order to look at the UFO situation and to see if America was being attacked by something untoward, they looked at this. The Collins Elite looked at this very seriously. It's rumoured, Bob, that the Collins Elite are still in operation today, and they're still looking around trying to discover what's going on behind the scenes. And that's a very interesting story in itself. And I'll just a clue for the listeners, because it gets into a terrifying area. But clue for the listeners is two world conflicts: World War I, World War II, a possible third one. What's the actual cause really? What's really going on? Even though we see it as geopolitical agendas and we see it as the different agendas of countries and nations fighting against each other, I would say that that's the net moving. What's the football? Where's the football? What's the ball? What's causing this? And so that's kind of like the information that the Collins Elite and psychic espionage will be looking at. And the thing is, Bob, is that I think Russia, America, and all of them do know what's going on. They'll probably have detailed analysis of it. It'll be similar to the X-Files. And we saw that open up, didn't we, on Channel 5, the first series the other night, didn't we? I don't know whether you saw it. And some of it was a bit off-piste. Some of it bared no resemblance to what goes on. No, it really doesn't, and yet some of it did. But what is interesting is the pressure that's involved with it all, and the fact that it's just, quite a filthy little business. There's no rest from it, Bob. No rest from it at all. There really isn't when you get into this game. There's just no rest from it at all.
You've got to be careful what you say, what you do, where you go.
Careful what you say and what you do, especially what you do. Yeah, you have, mate. You got to be respectful. I think. I'm very lucky to still be here. because there's things that have gone on that have been absolutely hair-raising. And I'm just very lucky to be here to tell the tale. You've got to be careful what you do, what you say, and be respectful, and maybe there's a lot to be said for Master Yoda stirring his cooking pot, Bob, there really is. In the Star Wars movies.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's true as well.
There isn't a lot
like
to be
what
said.
you say there, yes. Right, we're going nearly end of the show.
All
We've got
right.
about a minute and a little bit. Can you let everybody know where they can find you?
If you go to my YouTube channel, all the latest stuff is on there, including a UFO incident that happened last week over my house where the flipping thing flew through a radio antenna, which was the most bizarrest thing. It changed its shape, Bob, and flew literally through something and out the other side of it again. That's on my YouTube channel, Alien Noetic Superhighway, it's called. That's Alien Noetic, Noetic, Superhighway. And TonyTopping.wordpress.com is my web page as well. Right, that's wonderful. It's always good when you come on the show because you always give us a different point of view about everything.
I'm unorthodox,
we need
Bob.
to know.
Yeah, exactly, mate. I am unorthodox. We're trying to get a major TV project off the ground, but the trouble with that is that you just don't know with the agendas that go on whether a broadcaster will just taint everything and send it completely in the wrong direction. And so you've got to be careful with your intellectual property. But I am speaking next week at the Downley Arms up in High Wycombe. I think that's Tuesday, the 23rd of February. And I'm talking about UFO contacts up at the Downley at the Paranormal Meetup Group, High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group at the Downley Arms in High Wycombe.
Interesting.
Yeah, 23rd of Feb. I'll be there. I'll be talking about all this, talking about the image analysis, talking about a load of stuff, including probably, which we didn't cover tonight, Bob, which we'll cover for the next program, interactions in the space-time continuum is another subject we can go into for the next show that we do.
Yes. Well, Tony, thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend.
We'll try.
And take care. And I'm sure High Wycombe will be a success.
Oh, it will be, mate. Yeah, we've got High Wycombe. We've got Southport coming up on March the 19th. UFOs, the Human Factor as well. Big conference there. So, just email me, Bob. Get your listeners to email TonyOpsUFO. That's TonyOpsUFO at hotmail.com for info.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much again.
Okay.
And I'll talk to you soon.
You will, Bob. I hope your listeners got... We did it in an hour. It was like a crash course in a very complex world of psychic goings-on, wasn't it? So I hope your listeners just got the gist of it and can go away and check out newcosmology.com and learnrv.com. They're excellent websites to go and visit as well to find out more.
Lovely.
All right.
Right, cheers, mate. Thank you
Thank you very much, Bob. See you later.
Bye.